Welcome to the Military Transition Academy Human Resources Pathfinder series, where we explore the path from military service to civilian human resource roles. I'm Jeremy Burdick, and in our first two episodes, I'll be taking on the role of interviewer as we sit down with Misty Moreno. She brings over 24 years of valuable experience in the HR industry, and together we'll dive into her journey. Join us as we uncover Misty's insights, lessons learned, advice gained from her extensive career. If you're a veteran navigating your transition into civilian HR, these episodes are packed with valuable knowledge. Get ready to gain some incredible insights as Misty shares her wisdom with us on the Military Transition Academy Human Resources Pathfinder series. All right, welcome back to another episode of the HR Pathfinder, and we have Misty Moreno on, and she's going to guide us through some of the HR profession and the HR BOC, and we're just going to chat a little bit about the introduction and why we're here. And obviously, what's your vision really of this series, Misty, as we go forward with it?
Yeah, I would really like to just educate and inform and maybe a little bit of entertainment as well. Human resource professionals or maybe veterans who think that people are their thing. So I hear a lot of people say, well, I want to go do HR because I love people. And I'm always thinking to myself, do you really love people? Because let me just tell you one story that might make you know. I would just like to educate, inform, veterans who are thinking about transitioning to the civilian sector into like the true civilian sector, and not just human resources, but just in general, just to manage and lead people. So the veterans understand the differences between human resources, in the military and human resources in the civilian sector. Lots of different things we have to think of. We don't have the UCMJ, we have labor laws now. And anything and everything that you do will definitely be used against you by the by the employees. And now you're kind of putting the company at risk for litigation. So lots of things that we need to know, we need to comprehend, and we need to apply in order to be effective and efficient HR professionals.
Yeah, I love that. And ultimately it's like, if you're not prepared for it and you got to do the litigation portion, the amount of cost, it's like the cost. You think it's expensive to have a professional, try hiring a non-professional to do it, and
Absolutely.
you can rack up those costs. So when we're talking about HR or human resources management, HRM, what would you say now? In my mind, like military, right? I'm thinking first sergeant, right? You're in
Yeah.
charge of health and morale of the warfighter and making sure that they're ready and able to do their job. How does that, correlate with a civilian company?
So it correlates now in this move of HR. So HR is transitioning from being more administrative to being more strategic, where we have a chair at the table and where we're discussing the health and the morale and the benefits of the employees. And, I always say HR doesn't hire, HR doesn't fire, HR doesn't implement benefits. We recommend, we advise, we provide options, so on and so forth. And we're the voice of the employee, but we're also the voice of the company. People always say HR is not there for you, they're there for the company. So I do think that ineffective HR departments are there only for the company. Absolutely. But effective HR departments, like the one that I served on at a Fortune 500 company, we're there for the employee and we're there for the company. And there were a lot of times where we were 100% there, probably more for the employee than for the company. So, we're moving from the admin side of things. We still do that, right? We have generalists, we have specialists, but we're more strategic. We have a voice now, and we're really leading the charge and helping, mentoring, and coaching executives in order for them to be, mindful, aware of, and advocate for the health, morale, and benefits of the employees.
Yeah, I like the way you use the word advocate, right? So you're advocate for both the company, but also for the employee. So it's like an ambassador role, right? Like you're
Absolutely.
translating the language of each different, body, if you will, or individual entities, because they don't always speak the same, they don't always think the same, and it's almost like a modulation, if you will, because it's really easy for an executive to get into the, oh yeah, we got to get this done and at this value and this return on investment, and it's really easy for the employee to say, hey, I'm only getting paid between this hour and this hour, and oh, by the way, I'm just here for the money. And so it's kind of an interesting, did you find that with your role within a company, you had to kind of modulate those two thought processes?
Yeah, it was really tough for me because, in the civilian sector, you're working with people for the most part where it is just a job, right? And so they're coming to work, they're doing their very best, they're adding to the conversation, they're providing input, feedback, they're being the best darn employee that they can. But when they leave, like that's it. And that's different for military members, right? Because we're taught excellence in all we do, service before self, and 24/7, and we need to be ready, so on and so forth. So we lived and we breathed, the military. And so I had to really educate the executives on, hey, we're going to get the most out of our people, the best out of our people that we can, but we also have to provide them the environment that allows them to do that. But hey, when they go home, like they're not really required to answer their personal cell phone. Now, if you give them a business cell phone and you establish what those expectations are, then we'll go from there. But this nuance, like of being 24/7 all the time, those are expectations that I dare any executive or recruiter or hiring manager to say, hey, welcome to this job interview. The expectation is that you're on call 24/7. You're going to do this. And when I call you, you need to come. And no, I don't care about your family, blah, blah, blah. Like I want to see what their employee pool looks like. So
Yeah.
huge challenge, I think, for HR now, where we do have to advocate for the employee and for the business. And that's where, our military mentoring and coaching skills comes in handy. And I do believe that that's what set me apart when I was at, the company that I worked at, because I was able to truly get kind of to the bottom of what is this employee saying? What does this employee need? And what is this executive saying? What does this executive need? And let's try to bridge the gap.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It sounds like, you got the requirements of each and you kind of have to say, okay, this is what we both desire. Now let's figure out what we're both going to require out of each other. So it's a
Absolutely.
transaction. It's a financial transaction. So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think human resources is a very misunderstood career, role, and responsibility. And so, yes, there is a HR department in most companies that have more than 50 plus employees. However, just like safety and quality is everyone's role, so is managing and leading human resources. And that's where that's where a lot of people are like, well, we have an HR department. They need to worry about that. But you, as the manager, the supervisor, the executive, or even just the employee, you have to understand what you can and what you can't do when it comes to, labor laws, and it comes to discrimination and, everything that you hear about in the news. And so everybody has to be a human resources professional to some sort of degree. Like supervisors need to know that you can't say this or that, or you can't do this or that. It's not just HR. And that's why when the company that I was working at, the HR manager always said, our role as human resource professionals is to train, educate, mentor, and coach the supervisors on up. We also need to train, mentor, and coach the employees. And then they need to come together and work on some sort of solution. And we're there for the mediation, and we're there to tell them what they can do and what they can't do. Because as human resources professionals, we ask ourselves 3 questions. Can we do this? Is there some sort of policy, procedure, labor law that supports it, right? And we provide that. Should we do it? Is this going to be equal, fair, or equitable across the board? And then the next question is, will it benefit both the employee and the business? And so those 3 questions are questions that we often ask the employee, like, can you do it? Should you do it? Is this going to benefit the entire team, not just you? And those are 3 questions that we tell the supervisor, ask, can you do it? Should you do it? Will it benefit the entire plant or department or organization and not just you?
Yeah. And then a no, go back to the beginning, like stop, like don't keep going just because 2 are a yes. Like I can do it and it will benefit, but if it's not a should we do it, let's still stop doing it. So
yeah. And I dealt with this a lot. Obviously we have employees and supervisors and managers that are not always, living out the company's values and doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so automatically people think, oh, well, I just want to terminate them. Okay. Can we do that? We absolutely can, because most states in the US are at will employment, right? So technically you can quit anytime you want to. You don't have to give a 2 weeks notice. And technically we can terminate you anytime that we want to. We don't have to give you any notice either. The only thing that we need to make sure is that it's not due to some sort of protected category, discrimination, age, gender, religion, sex, I mean, you name it, right? But is that the best case scenario for the employee or the business? And it's no. Termination should not be the first solution. Mediation, coaching, and mentoring should be. But it's tough to get that point across to your employees and to your supervisors and managers and stuff like that. So it's a big role. It's a hard role for human resources professionals, and that's why I always say, you being a people person and like talking and stuff like that is like, that's not the only requirement. It's not the only requirement.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you're people helping people, right? And we're all a bit of an enigma, even to ourselves. So it's not like, and I commend HRCI for being able to put out an HR BOC. Like, I don't know how you put into words, what people are feeling when they're so dynamic, right? Every situation is different. Every individual is different. Their motivations are different. So it takes a lot, and as we go through this episode, we're going to talk about HR responsibilities, and we can break a couple of those down, and we'll go into the new direction of HR since the pandemic. So I'm kind of curious to see what your take is on that. But let's talk a little bit about the recruitment and selection process.
Yeah. So you hear a lot of stories. You see a lot of posts on LinkedIn and TikTok about these awful recruiters and, hiring managers and so on and so forth. But, the Human Resources Book of Knowledge that HRCI has authored, it's a great resource for human resource professionals. A lot of people can just go on the internet and download the information as well. But the HBOC, I just personally love having one book. It's very similar to the PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge. I just like having one book that I can reference. And so when it comes to recruitment and selection, just that, or talent acquisition, right? So talent acquisition is you're acquiring the talent. Recruitment and selection is you're recruiting that talent, right, from different sources, whether it be LinkedIn or Indeed or job boards, whatever it may be, and then you're selecting. So in HR, you have generalists and you have specialists. And usually it's your recruiting specialists that take on that role and responsibility for recruitment and selection.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And then, ultimately once you've selected somebody, the next logical step then would be their onboarding. So what does that look like? And then as far as responsibilities, like what role would HR play in that?
Yeah. So in general, HR is leading the charge on recruitment and selection, training and development, benefits, onboarding, orientation, so on and so forth. And so for the most part, they're creating the programs and the processes and the forms and whatever it may be. And then they're educating, mentoring, and coaching the key players. And when it comes to orientation and onboarding, orientation is an event. It's usually a 1 to 4 day event, and you're orientating new employees to the company. That's usually when they're going to bring their I-9. That is or fill out the I-9. That's their document that basically says that you're good to go to work in the USA. And they provide us all of their identification and official documentation. And then you also learn like basic safety, basic quality, anything that an employee needs to know immediately in order to enter the organization and not be a liability, right? So that's what happens in orientation. And that's where HR gets to brief on policies and procedures, benefits, get your benefit selection, provide you all the information that you need in order to get your pay good to go, whatever it is. That's orientation. Onboarding is usually a process and a program, 30 to 90 days. You hear about, what's it called? Probation, right? When you enter a company. But onboarding is where, yes, HR usually creates the onboarding activities in conjunction with your supervisor and manager, but it's the supervisor and manager that's leading the charge for onboarding. And so that's where they're going to get specific training on their department and their role, whatever it may be. So very similar to basic training. You go and learn how to be an airman, a soldier, a seaman, or a Marine, or a coastie, whatever it may be. And then you go to technical school, technical training, or A school, C school, where you learn about your specific role. So orientation, you're learning about the company. Onboarding, you're learning about your specific roles and responsibilities and department.
Oh,
So
great.
big role for HR. Say again, I'm sorry.
I like that. I was just gonna say it's like for me, it's like it's MEPS. It's like, hey,
Yep.
got your I-9, right? You signed your forms, you're
Perfect. Yeah.
raising your hand, all the paperwork's in order, and then hey, let's go learn about it. Let's go to basic training, figure out how to be an airman or whatever, or guardian if you want.
Yeah. So HR is leading the charge usually, right? HR is leading the charge on all of those things. So when it comes to recruitment and selection or talent acquisition, that includes orientation and onboarding. That's part of the entire process, and I did want to dispel some myths because we talked about it last time, but for those who are in the middle of their military transition or a job search, or maybe just looking, to change roles, whatever it may be, there's a couple things to remember when it comes to human resources and specifically your recruiters, right? Your recruiters, they have several different roles that they are trying to acquire talent for. So they're not experts. They're not experts in that specific role. Now, you may have a technical recruiter, that is more of an expert in STEM or engineering, whatever it may be. But for the most part, your recruiters are generalized specialists when it comes to recruiting, right? They know what they can do, what they should do, and what benefits the company. They're not, abreast on everything about this role, this responsibility. So that's why we always say, tailor your resume. And so I can tell you from my personal experience, our recruiting department would spend up to 10 seconds on a resume. And what are they looking for? You always say the preferred requirements, right, Jeremy?
That's
so
right.
You have basic requirements and you have preferred requirements. So that's why your resume needs to be tailored to the role that you're applying for, because this recruiter, who's a generalized specialist, not an expert in probably the role that you're applying for, is going to spend 7 to 10 seconds on your resume to see if you meet the requirements. And people are like, wow, that's not a lot of time. Yeah, you're right. And it's not fair, but life is not fair. But this recruiter is doing her very best to, adhere to all of her roles and responsibilities. And, truth be told, recruiting is probably only a small percentage of what they have to do, right? So it's important to understand in general what talent acquisition, recruitment, and selection entails. So then you, as the job seeker, will maybe have a little bit more empathy. They're not ghosting you. They just can't catch up. They can't get to you. They're doing their very best, right? But then you can also focus on what you can control. And we talk a lot about, what's in our circle of control. What can we do as the job seeker? And that way you don't have to rely on if the recruiter is effective or efficient.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we're all busy and we're all professionals, and you remember how many emails that you probably didn't read or didn't respond to. And it's no different for any other professional out there. I mean, your hair's on fire and you're just getting it done. I can see
Yeah.
that. So, kind of to what Misty said, what's the tactical thing that you can take away from it? Read your resume and see if in 10 seconds you jump out as meeting all the basic and preferred, because preferred really is mandatory because somebody on it is going to meet them, right? So,
Yep. And a really good tip for that is to front load your resume. So, or make a grand entrance. That's what I always tell our veterans when we mentor and coach them. Front load your resume. I don't care about what all the formats are. Keep it super simple. We have a great template on vets2pm.com/training. You could get a free resume template there. Keep it super simple. And in the very top, front load it. Front load it with the preferred requirements. Front load it with keywords from the job posting, right? And when I say front load, I don't mean crowd. I just mean give me, as the recruiter, something to read past 10 seconds for.
yeah, I like that. Yeah, great. Yeah, and so now we've kind of gone through it. There's the recruiting, the onboarding and orientation, and
Yeah.
then we've
Now
got
it's
training and development initiatives. So is that meaning like when they come on board, we're training them how to be an employee, or are we taking the entire section or the entire company and you're responsible for that as well?
yes and yes. So again, training and development most of the time falls under human resources. It is a an HR function, but it might be some organizations might just have a training function and they stand on their own. But for most organizations, training and development entails the initial orientation, the initial onboarding, and then the specific training, right? The training, very similar to what we do in the military, the tech school training, the skill level training, the safety training, the self-aid buddy care training, CPR training, whatever it may be, your training and development department orchestrates that. They may use vendors, they may have trainers. Every organization is different. Every budget is different, right? But most training and development departments will have like a learning management system similar to what the military does, and then have options and also mandatory requirements. So every year, just like we had to do like cyber training, right? Safety training, CPR training, whatever it may be, every organization is going to have a specific list of mandatory trainings. And that department is the one that sees to that we have the vendors or we give the training, and then everyone is doing the training.
Right. Got to have the paperwork to follow it up. Make sure, hey, every employee has done, how to use the company credit card, right? For example.
Yeah. And if there's a veteran out there that, because I talk to a lot of veterans that always say, yeah, I want to be training and development. Well, training and development is very different than what we think it is. Like I train and develop, but when we talk about training and development in the organization, be aware of what the ADDIE model is, right? How do you come up with training, right? How do you test and see if training's working? How do you see if, return on investment, all that stuff. So if you are interested in training and development, you might see it on the internet as TMOD, like training management, organizational development. Do a Google search, jump into ChatGPT, look at some job postings out there and just see what the requirements are. Just because you were a training manager in the military doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually a good fit for, TMOD in the civilian sector. So I always say, if you're interested in recruiting, interested in training and development, or interested in anything HR, look at job postings, see what those basic and preferred requirements are. Obviously, first focus on basic, and then now bridge the gap with some sort of professional certification like the APHR or the PMP, whatever it may be, right? And that is the best way to start your military transition. That's why we always say 36 months out, because you want to start with the education and the training to make you a more viable candidate.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just kind of struck me as like, make sure you meet the basic. It's kind of like you walk up to a soccer field. If you don't have your uniform on, your cleats and your shin guards, you're not meeting the basic requirements to be here, right? So you probably have to do that kind of stuff, because it's going to stand out if you don't have your cleats on, or you got, a basketball jersey in a soccer field. So then from there, it's how well can you play soccer, right? That's where the practice comes in. That's where the preferred, now I want you on my team, but you've got all the basics. Now, why do I want you on my team? Because of the preferred requirements. So I'm just a big fan of those, and making sure that you shine. And it's easy, like I said, 10 seconds. And then once you do shine, right, another function for HR is going to be that compensation and benefits administration. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So depending on your organizational sort of like model, you might have like a benefits and compensation section. Sometimes it's a lot of your recruiters that are doing that for you. And then there'll be sort of a middleman. So like you might have, like, for example, my company, in Sumter, we had like HR professionals who could talk to the compensation and benefits, right? We knew about it, but then we had our corporate who truly was the owner of compensation and benefits. So it really just depends on the organizational model. But just some things to know when it comes to, the benefits, the compensation and stuff like that, things that we're prepared, like as HR professionals, we're prepared to answer. So these are good questions for you guys, but, when you are looking for a job, asking what is the budget for this role, that will answer the salary question. Because if you ask, what are the salary, what's the salary for this role? They're going to turn it back on you, because I would do it because we're told to do it. We're going to turn it back on you and say, what is your expectation for the salary? And then you get into this, oh, well, if I say low, are they going to, shortchange me, whatever it may be. Well, personally, there is a law that stops organizations from doing that. So can it happen? Yes. But will they be caught? Absolutely. So they're most likely not going to put the company at risk. So if you think you're being lowballed, you're not. Their budget for that position just may not be what you're looking for. So the first question to ask is, what is the budget for this position? And they'll tell you, and they're going to give you a range. That range will usually vary from 30 to 60,000 because that's the potential for that role, right? Depending on your basic, your preferred, and anything else that you bring to the table. And then when it comes to benefits, there's so many different benefits. You have tangible, you have intangible benefits, and your HR professional will be prepared to show you what those are. Usually they'll have some sort of flyer or some sort of website that you can go to. And so, it's always good to know, yes, what your salary is, but sometimes you might be able to make up for your salary with some benefits. Or I will tell you this happens a lot too. Veterans tell me like, oh yeah, they're going to offer me $102K, but yet their medical is like $500 a month. So it's important to understand those questions. If I were a new job seeker right now, HR is prepared to answer the following. What is the budget for this position? Can you tell me the 5, biggest benefits that you offer? And then I would also ask the question about PTO and when you're allowed to take it, if you can sell it, can you bank it? It's just like leave, right? Carry over, whatever it may be. And those answers to those questions will hopefully help you in your job search. And HR is 100% prepared, to answer those questions.
Yeah, that's great, because I think that's some of the most questions that I get asked is like how to ask those questions without coming off sounding like you're there for the money. Because I think that's one of the biggest concerns from a military-minded individual is like, hey, I should be here for the organization, so I'm going to hide the fact that I really want to know what I'm going to get paid and what my benefits are, and it's just going to make it really awkward, right? But the way you put it is, hey, the company should be fiscally responsible enough to know what they're going to budget for a position, and it shouldn't be a huge secret. So if they give you a range and you're comfortable at the bottom or the top of the range, that's great. I think that you've answered a pretty great question, not to mention the PTO. I think as you start to see military members age up and age out of the military, time off and flexibility become probably a more important value to them rather than a bigger paycheck.
Yeah, and something too about the benefits, especially when it comes to PTO, and I will tell you, and I've stressed this to you a couple times, that was like my biggest shocker, because when I was a senior master sergeant in the Air Force and you were a chief, like we had time freedom, right? We had a lot of time freedom. We were trusted to do things. We could go and take our kid to an appointment. We could go and do whatever, and we didn't have to take leave for it, right? It's not always like that in the civilian sector. I was salary, so I had a little bit of time freedom, but you still had to be accountable for where you were and the hours that you put in, and that was a big deal for me. So going from 30 days a year to 17 days a year. Now we did have a lot of good holidays, and HR is a little different because you're always there. So, at least I had a great HR manager that always compensated me, but it is definitely something to think about. And, doctor appointments, especially if your salary, one of the questions that you should ask along with what is the budget for this position, when it comes to PTO, you should ask, how many hours at a time am I required to take? Because at my company, I had to take 8 hours. I had no option. And so when you're looking at 17 hours and you minus 8, 17 days and you minus 8, it's like, I'm already at 16 now, and I only needed to go to a 2-hour appointment. So an important question to ask. And then, especially for military members, the 401k match was a big thing for me, and your HR professionals are prepared to talk to you about this. Now, I will say that they can't give you advice on 401k. They'll just, take you to the website, 401k.com. Anyone can go there and research it. The question to ask, though, your HR professional is, what is the match? And when it comes to vested. So you'll hear 100% vested or 30% vested. And what that means is the company that I worked at, we were 100% vested from the beginning. So day one, anything I put in my 401k and anything they put in my 401k to match it was mine. So when I left with everything. But not every company does that, especially now when it comes to the budget.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's something to touch on because yeah, the vested part is a bit of a confusing. The match, I think everybody's got because if you think of TSP, if I put in 2%, they match me 2%. If I put in 4%, they match me 4%. So, and there is a limit usually to that. So that's question number one. Question number two, just like you said, it's when is that money yours? You know, and that is an extremely important part. So I like that you bring that up because I don't know that I would have thought to ask that. When we talk about like employee relations and conflict resolution, you know, where does HR get involved in that?
Yeah, I would say we probably get involved like at the very beginning, but that's not where we should get involved. Employee relations is everyone's job. So human resources is everyone's job. So if you become a supervisor, you are now, you know, an agent of the company and you become a supervisor because you like people. There's no other reason why you become a supervisor unless it's for money. And if that's the case, but for the most part, that's the case, right? But yeah, it's everyone's role when it comes to employee relations. Employee relations is simply just ensuring that everybody understands what the expectations are of them when it comes to being an employee, and then everybody knows their roles and responsibilities, and then their attitude and the way that they react and respond at work. Employee relations has a lot to do with teamwork and has a lot to do with how other people are getting along with each other and just how we treat employees, you know, when they're at work and also when they're not at work, and, you know, when they're going through hard times or good times, whatever it may be. So yeah, it's a big category, and HR is usually there right from the beginning. And this is where people think that this is HR's role, like morale is HR's role and culture is HR's role. No, it's not. It's our role to recommend, advise, create, you know, these programs, but it's everyone's role.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting the way you put that is, it's everybody's job, yet everybody's probably not doing it. So, and like the promotion thing, I think the Peter principle is replete in corporate America, just as it is in the military too, is like you promote yourself to incompetence. And then,
Yeah.
and then at that point, it's like, just because you were a good wrench turner does not mean that you're going to be a good first sergeant. Just because you were a good tire maker doesn't make you a great HR individual. You know, like you get promoted to your incompetence and then HR has to bear that brunt, I think. I mean, I think that's why you guys are there. You're specialists
Yeah.
in resolving the conflict that these supervisors create.
Yeah, we're usually the ones behind the closed doors saying, no way, he's a technical expert, but he does not have the leadership aptitude. Is everyone a leader? Absolutely not. Can everyone be trained, coached, and mentored to be a leader? Yeah, I would also say absolutely not. I think that everyone has to have a growth mindset in order to be trained, coached, and mentored to be a good leader. But just like you had made the comment, you know, how do you ask the questions without coming off that money is important to me? Well, first off, let's just say if someone is taken aback by you asking what the salary is, then sometimes that's a cue into maybe this is not the company and organization for you, right? So let's not beat around the bush. Everybody works for a paycheck. Everybody works for a paycheck. So it is important that you ask from the get-go what the budget is, right? Because we don't want to waste your time and we don't want to waste any recruiter's time. Especially nowadays in the job market, we're going through 4 or 5 rounds. That's another question I would ask is how many rounds of interviews is going to be taking place, because you're doing that on your free time or usually taking PTO from your last company, right? And when it comes to being a supervisor, you know, HR is in the room trying to advocate for the department manager who's hiring the supervisor, advocating for the supervisor who wants this position. And so we're usually in the background coaching and mentoring both parties. Hey, do you understand what this role requires? hey, do you know that he's a technical expert, but he's not necessarily professionally developed as a leader? And so we're going to have to put in some time and energy into him if you want him in this role. Why do you think he'd be a good supervisor? Is it because he's a technical expert? What are the roles and responsibilities? So that's where HR is. And that's how our role has changed since the pandemic, where we have a seat at the table now. We're strategic, right? It's strategy and action. And our HR department, where I worked, really came up with the strategy for or recommended, advised, our executives as far as the strategy for the year. So lots of different hats, lots of different roles. That's why it's so important, one, to validate your HR experience through maybe a professional certification, have a resource like the HBOC from HRCI, or just have a good amount of websites that you can go to. I always start with Department of Labor and then EEO, those things. And because you really can teach yourself and train yourself how to be an effective and efficient HR professional with all of the resources that are out there. But it's good to know what your organization expects out of you as well.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, set the bedrock with the law.
Yeah.
And then work up from there into
What
organization.
can I do? What should I do?
Right. Or should not.
And that's, should we do this? Because there be so many times that HR professionals have great ideas, right? Or supervisors or managers have great ideas. And that's where, we all have to kind of get in the room and realize that we're on the same team. We want to benefit the employees, right? Because talent acquisition and also talent retention is everyone's role. It's not just HR's role, right? And then we also, obviously just need to make sure that we're supporting the business. So those conversations should take place together, and it's not just HR's role.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. It's, the organization is an organism and they all collectively work together. So I like that you brought up the pandemic, because obviously, that has changed the employment, environment forever. I mean, let's face it. So what are some of the things that you saw, like especially the shift towards virtual work?
Yeah, immediately we needed to ensure that our work from home policy was actually, in fact, applicable for the pandemic. So, the company that I worked for, immediately when, South Carolina was shutting down, or businesses were, going like work from home, or maybe even shutting down, we just had to first do a total review of the policy and rewrite it. And so at first we did have a work from home. It's like they were allowed to work 1 day a week up to 4 times a month. That was prior to the pandemic. Well, now, depending on your organization, will obviously determine your work from home policy. But that was the first thing that we need to do, was review our policies and then update them accordingly. When it comes to policy updates, that's not just an HR role. We have to look at the strategy of the business. We have to talk to supervisors and managers. Hey, could you support this? If we wrote it like this, what do you think? Because once we put out a policy, it's not HR's policy, right? It's the organization's policy. So it's important that everybody is on board. So that's the first thing that we had to do, was review and then rewrite the policy. And then anytime you're going through any sort of change, right? Change management. So you have to educate, inform, have some sort of rollout plan, make sure people acknowledge, the new changes and acknowledge their roles and their responsibilities. And one thing that I will tell you, it was really important where I worked, was to explain the why behind the policy, because we didn't have a flexible work from home policy, but there were reasons. We were a 24/7 manufacturing facility that had 4 shifts, and there's more production floor workers than there are, so we're a German company, so we called it white collar, blue collar, so once we were really able to educate and inform the why behind the policy, we noticed that people were starting to truly buy in, right? Now, I personally believe that you should buy in anyway. If you're an employee and you're getting paid, you need to buy in. If it's not unethical, immoral, or against the laws, then you should buy in. But people do need to understand, because it's not only the employment environment that changed, it's daycare, it's school, and so we just had a local school right now not start their school year or their school day until 9 a.m. Like, those are things that we have to be aware of. And so as an HR professional, it's also important to understand the community, right? So just like in project management, we always say that you need to do a review of the internal and the external environment, right? For human resources, same thing. You need to review the internal and external environment in order to understand how your policy is going to land with the employees.
Yeah, yeah, you make a good point about like being copacetic with the environment slash um, the community, right? And at large. And there's a huge research out there saying that kids chronologically or their chronotype, they undergo like they want to get up later, but then they're more effective in the later hours. So starting school later is more beneficial for the kid. But if I can't get my kid to school because my job doesn't allow it, then that creates a problem. So even from a school superintendent level, they should take that into effect is how many kids will have a burden of getting to school late or never or not at all because I'll have to homeschool you because I can't lose my job over you learning better, right? Like, so it's one of
Yeah.
those weird things, and employers have to do the same thing. They have to think about that. And it's like, wow, okay, maybe I
Yeah.
have to do late reporting. You can work from home for the first 2 hours and then come to work after you drop your kid off.
Yeah, and the pandemic just changed the landscape of everything. And so we had to really change the way that we thought of work, and that, we also needed to ensure that supervisors, managers, executives, and HR professionals are not just thinking about their schedule. If we have 4 shifts that work 12 hours and we have employees coming and going at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., we do have to think about schools, and we have to think about the community as well. So that's why, just like I'm sure, I hope that the schools that changed their report time to 9 a.m., that they had some data gathering sessions, some workshops, some surveys, some interviews, right? They analyzed the data, they were able to visualize the data, and then they came to a consensus that this was the best fit for everyone involved and not just for the administration. HR has to do the same thing. So when the pandemic came about, when it came to like mask policies, safety policies, all these things, we didn't just make decisions in a vacuum. Some decisions needed to be made immediately, and then we adapted and adjusted when we received feedback. But most of the time, we're doing surveys, interviews, workshops, quick conversations to gather this data, analyze it for the greater good, right? Will it benefit the entire organization to include the employees? And then, execute a new policy. But I will tell you, as an HR professional, the pandemic taught me the biggest lesson learned just in life. It's like, adjust fire. Adjust fire. We learned that in the military, right? If you're off target, you adjust fire. When it comes to HR policies and procedures, obviously change management, you want to let something go for a little bit just to see, is this actually going to work? But if it impacts the greater good, and it's a negative impact, it might be beneficial to adjust fire. And we can do that if we're professionally developed, we're trained, we're certified, we know what we can and should do, and we know what the strategy of the organization is and what the needs and desires are of the employees, then we should be able to adjust fire pretty quickly. And that's what we had to do for the pandemic. We're still doing it, still a different landscape. I absolutely love working from home. If I had to go back to the office, I would probably seriously consider, maybe a career change. I'm not sure. And the community, the schools, the daycare, there's a lot more to think about than just the business. So
Yeah.
Everyone, to include HR, has to lead that conversation, engage in the conversation, and think about what's going to benefit the employees and the organization.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the mental health, side of things and well-being. A happy employee is producing more. If you're on the way to work thinking about, driving into a bridge or a tree or something, that's probably not going to be a quality work. But if they're extremely happy because you thought about their environment and you thought about, hey, this best suits my employees, and that essentially motivates them to get to that next level of, hey, they were good workers, now they're great. You're going to reap the benefits of it. Everybody wants to do a good job. They just have to have the ability to do so and encouraged to do so.
Yeah, and they have to be in an environment that allows them to do so. The old adage, like, you need to keep your personal life separate from your professional life. Like, I'm not sure what world you're living in, but there is no way to do that anymore. Like, yes, emotional intelligence, but if my kid is sick and is not self-sufficient, I can't leave my kid at school. I can't leave my kid alone. Like, organizations need to have some sort of empathy and some sort of processes in place that allow that flexibility. There's obviously exceptions to the rule, but there's a lot of things that we can do from home, which would be better than not having that employee do anything, right? So
Yeah, and as a
lots of
tactical
things.
tip, you think
Yeah.
about like the tactical tip of, for somebody in an interview. Aren't these great questions? Like for you, you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to make sure they're a good fit, just like they're trying to make sure you're a good fit. You're in the room because you're qualified for the job. Now
Yep.
let's see, is it an environmental fit? Is it a cultural fit? Is the compensation worth my time from a mental perspective? And is the job so rigorous that I won't be happy, or not rigorous enough? Because there are certain people that need that rigor.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, they get extremely bored and then they want to quit anyway. So, like all those things are really amazing questions. And I know we didn't, bring them out like that, but as the listeners out there, that's really what you should be pulling away from these. The tactical tips. Do I want to be in HR? And when I'm interviewing, if I don't want to be in HR, hey, what
Yeah.
questions can I ask? Should I ask? And, will I ask them? But that really brings us to who is a good fit for HR?
Yeah, it's important to do a self-assessment. And so one of the things that we preach at That's to PM is we have a military transition handbook, and it basically has you come up with like a love-hate list. And I always call it kind of your non-negotiables. So when you are looking for a job, you need to do a serious self-assessment. How do you want your work-life balance to look like? Because that's important. There are some roles out there that do not afford you the opportunity to have work-life balance the way that you picture it.
Right.
Everyone defines work-life balance differently. And so it's important that you understand what is your definition of work-life balance and what are you willing to compromise on, right? So if you're on call, if you're salary, if you're hourly, travel, so on and so forth. So it's important to think about that. So do the self-assessment. So I always say, ask yourself, what kind of work-life balance do you want? How much do you want to travel? Do you want to work shift work, so on and so forth? Do you want flexible PTO policies? Because not every organization has a flexible PTO policy. That's kind of the first thing to think about. And then think about, what kind of work do you actually like doing? I do not like it when people say I'm a people person, because I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Now, and I also don't like it when people say I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert. So when it comes to human resources, think about it. You're going to be dealing with different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different ages, right? You have Generation X, you have millennials, whatever it may be, right? Are you the type of person that can manage your stress, manage your anxiety, be emotionally intelligent when the world is on fire, when everything is an emergency? Can you calm down, manage conflict, solve problems? Do you get annoyed? Do you get annoyed when people don't do what they're supposed to do? Are people a pain point for you? I ask this question all the time. And I remember someone saying to me, he was a people person, whatever. And then like 20 minutes into the conversation, I was like, it kind of sounds like people are a pain point. And then he's like, yeah, I basically hate people. Never mind. You're absolutely right. Because sometimes in the military, it's hard, especially when you have a very specific job. Like my husband was a weapons loader. What is he going to do? Load weapons for ISIS? So a lot of people, if you were a supervisor, people will equate that like, oh, I can do human resources. But you have to ask yourself, okay, you can do human resources, but do you actually want to? I would also say that you have to be more than agile. You have to be one that can manage time and task, regardless if you actually have the time. You have to be disciplined where you're following up, following through, and you really have to be someone that cares enough about everyone, regardless if they have different values and different morals from you, right? In different cultures. I mean, I worked in a global company, and like the Brazilians were very different than the South Africans, Germans are very different than the Mexicans, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It's just the way that they're brought up. Their culture is very different. So I loved interacting and engaging with the people from Brazil and the people from Mexico. Not so much always with the Germans and the South Africans, just a different culture. But also who I am, if anyone knows me, would immediately equate and say, oh yeah, she would be better off talking to the Brazilians and the Mexicans, right? So yeah, I would say you have to just do a serious assessment. And one thing to remember too is when you go to the interview, so first off, your resume gets you the phone call gets you the interview gets you the job. So I know a lot of people are stressing about this resume. That's why we always say, get on LinkedIn, connect, build a community that is outside of the military, so you don't have to rely on if your resume is going to get read past 10 seconds. You have a reputation, you have connections that are advocating for you. That's why we always preach the network, right? But when you're in the interview, make sure you realize too, like sometimes there are jobs that you are not a fit for, but most of the time it has nothing to do with your knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so one thing that us as HR professionals, when we're interviewing someone, we have to look at not only do they meet the basic and preferred requirements, but we also have to look at, are they a good fit for the current team, right?
Yeah.
Are they a good fit for the current team? Do you want 5 Misties on one team? Probably not, Jeremy, right? Do we want 5 Jeremys on one team? I know you're like, do I answer that?
See, no, it's a trick question.
Yeah. No, we can't have 5 Jeremys. We can't have 5 Misties because that would not be diverse, right? And we need to be a diverse team, not just in ethnicity, gender, whatever, but also in talent, right? And so ask the questions in your interview. But also know too that there's a lot of false advertisement going on from the employee and the employer. And so that's why I always say, give your job a year. And at the end of the year, if it's something that you can't see yourself doing, or, unless it's toxic, and toxic, everyone has a different definition. So that's why I always say, unless you are in an unethical environment, immoral environment, or you're doing illegal things, you can endure a year, right? Most of us have, been to Afghanistan, Iraq, and all these other deployments. We can endure a year. And that way you really get to understand who this company, who this employer is, and you can see if you are actually a good fit. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. It is about money, 100%. It is about money. But then what else, right? So ask the questions.
No, I like that. I think you have to, like you said, you have to get to know the employer, but just get to know your team and then your immediate supervisor. All those things together really create a work environment. So, I mean, you've got a lot of other things on top of that when it comes to compensation, when it comes to conflict, what you're trying to do, and realize a lot of times, like you said, Missy, you're going to get ingrained. You're going to figure it out. Like you said, there's a lot of false advertising. I don't know that they necessarily do it on purpose on either end.
No.
It's hard to sometimes tangibly talk about, hey, what's the environment in this work center? Oh, by the way, guess what? As soon as you come, you've changed it. So they couldn't tell you. There is no way to concretely say if you're a good fit or not. We're just making the best risk decision as we can to put you in there and say, we think you're going to fit. But you know what? That's like putting a goldfish in a beta tank. Sometimes it's just not a good fit. Like we think, oh, we needed that. Nope. That didn't work out so well. But I like it. And there's transferable skills. I do think every veteran has some transferable skills in HR. You do have the ability to talk to people. You do have the ability to care for people. You're usually really good at training and development and saying, hey, listen, I can learn something really quick to a technical specification that's required. I think that's really good. So you're a good hiring decision for most recruiters. You can show up on time. You're usually neat and clean. You're usually drug-free, and you're usually willing to do the work, so long as you don't get disillusioned, right? And I think then it's take it on the HR side of things. It's your responsibility to give them the tools to succeed, right? You got to tell them what your expectations are. And it needs to be clear. I've seen too many employees flounder on orientation and onboarding that it's like, it wasn't their fault. It really was the fault of the organization because they
Yep.
didn't have the tools to succeed. You need to, and fight for yourself, be your self advocate. What are my expectations? And you do this really well, Missy. Like, what do you expect of me today? Kind of thing. It's, oh, well, great, just do your thing, because you're awesome. So, I mean, but that's a bad answer from an organizational perspective. You want to know, these are the requirements. How do I exceed those requirements? That way you get to go home happy and the organization gets to go home happy. So I just say, continue to fight for them. I do think military members can make really great HR professionals, as Misty
Yeah.
has put out. If there's, like, as we wrap this up, and we've talked a little bit about who's a good fit, we've talked about the pandemic, we talked about responsibilities of HR. What is HR? Last little bit of tips, tactics, and tricks to basically help them get excited about the HR career field.
Yeah, I mean, I always say you don't have to have a 5 or 10 year plan. So, take your military transition 1 year at a time, take a new role 1 year at a time, get the most out of it, right? What can you learn? Like I tell people this all the time. What can you learn from this role? Who can you meet? Who can you connect with, right? You never know what is going to happen within that year. So just make your timeline 1 year. What am I going to learn? What am I going to do? I always say take 30 to 60 days, observe, contribute, but observe first, contribute, ask some good questions. That's the biggest thing that I learned within my first 30 days as an HR professional at this company is that ask questions. If it's not happening, I guarantee you there is a reason why there is not a program, there's not a process, or there's a reason. So just ask questions, but ask those questions in a manner where it's not, you're not going to, like, what I'm trying to, I don't want to say the curse word, but
Yeah, you don't want to offend them for not
yeah,
doing what
exactly.
you
The
think.
person, see, I don't even have that word in my language, Jeremy. But the person next to you, to your right and to your left, are the people that have been digging their heels in and trying to survive, especially post-pandemic. So when you come in thinking that you know everything, like, hold on, you're special. You serve the country 100%. You absolutely probably can be the best HR professional that this company has ever had. But, make sure that you respect the people that are on your team. I mean, I would not be where I am at all if it was not for my HR team. Carla and Emily kept me out of trouble, and I remember Emily doing this one time in a meeting, and I was like, and then at the end, when everyone left, she was like, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't going to say anything that would impact your relationship with the engineers. And I was like, thanks so much. She's like, it's not that you were doing anything wrong, but I just know them, and so make sure too, when you start at your company, ask for a veteran mentor, someone that, is in the company that was a veteran, and maybe they can mentor you as well. And that will also help you as an HR professional because they'll give you some insights into how they view, the HR department. And that will help you kind of assess, like, what should you do? What should you not do? So on and so forth. But yeah, that would be my advice. Take it 1 year at a time. Be open to a different way of doing things. If you want your new organization to be the military, then you might need to reassess why you separated and retired in the first place. Most of us are getting out prior to having to. So don't get amnesia. Don't make this new organization the military. There's a reason why they're not the military, right? And then get a mentor. Ask for a veteran mentor. Your HR department will have an informal list of veterans, right? And they'll be able to pair you up.
Beautiful. Yeah, let me sum that up a little bit because I think there's some really good sage wisdom in here. Is first, walk a mile in their moccasins kind of thing, right?
Yes.
You have to understand the company issues, why there isn't a program. There might be a really good reason. It might have failed already because either it was poorly executed or it's not applicable, or it's not beneficial. So I like that. And then, I think the other part is reframing. You said it, but you didn't necessarily use that word. But look at those problems from that individual's perspective. Their hair's on fire, their world's on fire. Essentially, they're doing the best they can do, and maybe see the problem from their side. It's like, I've got to train you, right? I didn't have enough time to do 9 of the 10 things I needed to do. Now you've given me 11 things to do, and that's one of them's train you. Try to be additive. be value add, like from day one. What can I do to help you do your
Yes.
job, essentially better? Or what can I do to help the organization? So I just think it's super important to have the perspective and then reframe it from their position as well. And I love it. I think everything you said here was great. And I appreciate you being on this episode. And I think the HR Pathfinder is a series that's just going to keep on going, and we'll get some corporate professionals in here and really get some excellent tips and tricks for the transitioning military veteran.
Absolutely. And if anyone wants to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn. We can talk HR. I have time in my calendar, for that. We can do a quick 30-minute chat. If you need any help, just go to vets2pm.com/training for our free resources. Lots of good things there. We have some HR tips from yours truly. So just let me know if you need anything, and just keep your head up. You're new at this military transition, so please don't let perfection be the enemy of good.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HR Pathfinder series. And if you want to progress your career as an HR professional, please head over to vets2pm.com and check out the training page and see what we have in store for you.